Like a Dragon Gaiden, The Man Who Erased His Name is the latest release in the series once known as Yakuza. Now firmly entrenched in the West as the Like a Dragon games, this franchise follows an established formula that blends a serious narrative with irreverent and often ridiculous side activities. The Man Who Erased His Name is a spin-off from the mainline series, with the majority of the game set parallel to the events of Yakuza Like a Dragon, and leading into the events of the upcoming Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth. It launched on the PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5, Xbox One, Xbox Series and PC on the 8th of November 2023. This game returns original series protagonist Kazuma Kiriyu, who has enough backstory to fill several biographies. Thankfully, you don't need to have seen or played any of Kiryu's previous exploits for this to make sense. He's a former Yakuza enforcer who faked his death to protect those close to him, and after a few years, he now works for the group who helped him disappear as a secret agent. This story sees our stoic, suit-wearing brawler tread familiar paths when he has a run-in with some Yakuza who discover he's not really dead. Kiryu, acting under the name Ryu, must walk that fine line between friend and foe, which mostly includes punching people, repeatedly, to get to the bottom of a conspiracy that invariably includes some plot involving a cast of Yakuza bigwigs. Most of the game features Kiryu helping the citizens of Osaka and trying to dethrone a high-ranking member of the Omi Alliance. This then leads to a climactic battle which crosses over with the events from Yakuza Like a Dragon. Although this is a spin-off title, I was surprised that the plot took me 21 hours to salt away. That time included a fair bit of side content and wasn't just a straight run through the story. This is very short compared to the usual Like a Dragon games, with my perfect gameplay time landing just shy of 35 hours. I went in knowing the main narrative wouldn't be the same length as one of the mainline games, but I was expecting this to have enough to stretch out a bit longer than it did. My PlayStation tells me I spent 129 hours playing Yakuza Like a Dragon, if you're looking for a bit of context. During the main narrative, Kiryu encounters a few characters worthy of note, with his handler Hanawa one of the more interesting additions, as he's not a Yakuza meathead. He's a smart company man who works with Kiryu, and it's his abduction that fuels the early plot. The other standout character here is jack-of-all-trades Akame. She brings some much-needed energy and enthusiasm to contrast Kiryu's stiff stoicism. Akame also stands out on an island in a world where most of the main cast are ambitious men in fancy suits, clawing for power. She runs an information network among the homeless in Osaka and recruits a reluctant Kiryu to help solve problems among her informants. Her odd jobs make up most of this game's side quests. The game takes place briefly in a small sectioned off map of Yokohama and features some areas that are familiar if you've played Yakuza Like a Dragon. Soon after, Kiryu moves to Osaka, searching for the abducted Hanawa. As is standard for the Yakuza games, you explore the city on foot, with the environment being a relatively small, self-contained map filled with side activities and shops. These range from golf and pool to the series staple karaoke. Once again, these elements create a harsh juxtaposition, placing the serious life and death main narrative against the irreverent side content, which feels like one big in-joke with fans. Quite early on, Kiryu visits a giant boat, housing a hedonistic playground for members of the criminal underworld and wealthy patrons. This is called the Castle, and features gambling halls, a casino, a high-end boutique, and a gladiatorial arena for cage matches. It's the latter that is the game's primary side activity, and sees Kiryu compete to earn money and renown. Later on, you're tasked with recruiting your own team for brawls, and leveling these up feels remarkably similar to Like a Dragon Ishin's squad system. This is a part of the game that you can really steer into, and try and progress early on. And it's also one of the better ways of making money. With all that cash, you can invest in Kiryu to improve his skills and fighting ability. Combat is a real-time brawler, as opposed to the previous game's shift to a turn-based system. You control Kiryu in one of two stances, his more traditional Yakuza stance, which relies on brute strength to pummel targets, and his new secret agent gadgets, which are accompanied by a faster paced style of combat. The latter of these include drones, shoes with jets on, exploding cigarettes, and a lasso style gadget that can toss your foes aside. These can be upgraded and more skills can be unlocked with points earned from helping Akame and cold hard cash. Combat in general relies heavily on these fights being methodical in their structure. Most of the time you're repeating a few basic hits of a combo and then quickly dodging or throwing up a block to avoid retaliation. Without any heat to perform actions, fighting feels janky, and you can certainly see why the series steered hard into turn-based combat for Ichiban's games. Boss fights are attritional slogfests, where you repeat these same combos to chip away at health, and unless you take the time to amass a fortune beforehand and upgrade every skill, you'll likely need to burn some healing items to keep pace with the damage coming at you. In these fights, heat actions give you big damage potential, and feature some brutal takedown sequences, but outside of these and a few set scripted animations, you don't really feel powerful until the very late game. The gadgets that come with Kiryu's agent style do liven up an otherwise mundane slugfest, with the spider gadget being very useful in clearing the field once fully upgraded. The others are situationally useful and fun to use, but are generally less efficient than repeatedly punching your foes. It feels like there's a next gear or level of combat missing, like a final stage of Kiryu's fighting evolution that combines the brawler nature of his Yakuza style while being surrounded by high-tech gadgetry. You can further enhance Kiryu's base stats by equipping gear. This can be acquired through spending cash or accumulating and then exchanging points earned by playing one of the minigames. Interacting with most things in this game progresses you in some way, even if it's just buying food in a restaurant or picking up an item on the floor. But there's no denying that the scale of content here feels less impressive than in other Like a Dragon games. As you'd expect, you're revisiting a lot of old ground if you've played any of the previous titles. Series staples return successfully, but what's new is minimal and underwhelming. In truth, the castle and its Colosseum is the only part that feels new enough to capture your attention. As we're back in Sotenbori for this game, which is the one-time home of Goro Majima's cabaret minigame, I thought this would return as this game's big side activity with a new twist. For context, this is a minigame in Yakuza-0, where Majima recruits and trains women to work at his club. To me, this was very similar to playing any kind of manager game. Think a very, very basic version of Football Manager, but with hostesses instead of Wonder Kids. I was very focused on the nature of this minigame, trying to be the most efficient manager, recruiting units, essentially trying to make a lot of money for Majima and the club. The way this is now presented is more of an awkward dating sim, and to put across my opinion as generously as I can, this is cringe-worthy fanservice that made me feel remarkably uncomfortable. These interactions use recorded footage of real women, as opposed to in-engine character models. Aside from the obvious and gratuitous fangirling at every word our protagonist utters, these interactions just feel painfully forced. The most real thing in these scenes is the reflection of a ring light in each of the girls' eyes. After you level up your affection to the third stage, the final scene is some variation of the player character going home with these women, which puts them in a situation that would be best suited at the start of a softcore pornographic film. True to that genre, these are complete with D-list writing and innuendo-laden dialogue that heavily implies that each of these have a deep and psychologically damaging infatuation with Kiryu. This is all accompanied by some exaggerated posturing and presenting that would have only been more agonizingly surreal if it had a nature documentary-style voiceover describing what was going on. This isn't the first time this series has used footage of real people to this effect, and the game's 18+ PEGI rating is well deserved for many other reasons before this element raises its head. Furthermore, it's not like I'm someone who has much of a high horse to get up on, but I think this section reflects a series of poor decisions, the results of which is the most awkward section of gameplay I have ever come across. Thankfully, you can skip these scenes for achievements, but you do have to go here at least once as part of the main story. Some activities that I've liked previously in these games do return, particularly Pocket Racer, which sees our suit-wearing protagonist enthusiastically race a tiny car on tracks. You can buy parts and swap out components to compete in races and get the best times, as you could in prior games. This is engaging once again, and you can branch out into other side content to acquire new parts and build your perfect racer. There's plenty of these returning tasks that add up to form the activity log. This is a laundry list of things the game wants you to do to approach 100% completion, and represents almost every in-game action you can perform. Although this is to be expected, this spin-off game certainly feels miles away from a mainline game, and that's enforced in my mind by some notable absences. I couldn't find a fishing minigame here, and that's usually a series staple. The Colosseum in the castle does feel like the most prominent side activity, but that's just a sequence of fights. This is a Like a Dragon game. A sequence of fights is pretty much mandatory. The main story holds up in quality and features all the usual betrayals, backstabs, and returning characters. It fails to deliver in terms of the length, and at times I did question whether or not the series gained anything from telling this part of the story from this point of view. If you've not played a game starring Kazuma Kiriyu before, you'll get the most from this experience, as a lot more of it will be new to you. But I'd be recommending a handful of other titles, including Ishin, Like a Dragon Yakuza, and Yakuza-0 over this one. One element that might rope in a few longtime fans is that upon finishing the main story, you gain access to a brief trial version of the upcoming Infinite Wealth. If you intend to play that game and want to get a 30-minute story preview, you absolutely can. This is still early footage that is being worked on, as evidenced by some of the grammatical mistakes in the subtitles. One gleaming positive that I do want to point out is Like a Dragon Gaiden's strong technical performance. I experienced no problems with loading times, frame stability, and general performance. The game's recommended specification calls for the relatively mid-tier 2060, so this isn't a massively demanding title to begin with. I also want to highlight two small things within the game that I appreciated too. The first is that it doesn't matter what GPU upscaling you want to use, as the game supports Nvidia's, AMD's, and Intel's. It's certainly unusual to see all three supported like this. The second is that the game shows the PlayStation button icons if you're using a PS5 controller on PC. This is a nice touch, one that's often not baked into PC releases. Graphically speaking, this is exactly what you'd expect for a title released cross-generationally, and lands somewhere between a good PS4 visual and a good PS5 visual. There are some visual flaws that I could nitpick, such as the icon on the back of this tablet jumping marginally to the left during a late game cutscene, but I am really reaching to drag that up. This is solid but not special. Another thing worthy of note is that the game doesn't have an English language audio track at launch. According to a statement made by Kiryu's new English voice actor, one is due to come eventually. It just isn't available right now. What always stands out to me about the Like a Dragon or Yakuza games is the way that they seemingly revere side content. Each game has one or two deep and developed mini-games that you can get lost in for hours, and returns all favourites with new twists to make them feel fresh and new. At their absolute best, these are supposed to feel like they could be indie games in their own right. I'm thinking specifically of games like the Cabaret management game from Yakuza-0, or Ichiban's Ichiban Holdings minigame from Yakuza Like a Dragon. That same reverence is misplaced here. And aside from one or two really great moments in the story, which I'm not showing for spoiler reasons, this is mostly just fine. I appreciate and understand that this wasn't supposed to be the juggernaut that Infinite Wealth will likely be, but for now, this is designed to appeal only to the most hardcore of Like a Dragon fans, and it feels surprisingly light on meaningful content.